tarot deck. It is quite unusual, very esoteric, and calls things different things, like the mystics, the Gnostics, the Magis, and the Shekinah. So those would be the four suits are called that. And the woodcuts are old woodcuts. And
sounds cool.
So you would understand it better than I, but I'm working on it because the correlations go even deeper than just the regular numerology and alphabet.
Okay, Nick, we're live online on YouTube, and we have 3 people watching so far. So,
all right, great. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Tarot as a Roadmap for Life series. And over the coming weeks, myself and a few other of the weekly panelists will be engaged in a mini series that I'm going to call Tarot Permutations. And we are going to attempt to rehash some of the cards in the Major Arcana, take a look backwards at them, and also make a comparison either between 2 or 3 different cards. So the week before this one, I gave a presentation about the general idea going forward, at least for the summer, and the different methods of comparison that I plan to use. So with that in mind, tonight we plan to get into 2 specific cards. I've prepared a little presentation, some information in the form of slides, and we'll see what we can churn up. So give me just a second to get this stuff pulled up here. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Cool. Okay, so these are the 2 cards that I plan to explore over the course of this presentation. So this will be Tarot Permutations, the Lovers and the Devil. Okay, so before going into the specifics of this week's comparison, I want to first recap a few points which will play a major role throughout the mini-series in the coming weeks. The reason for comparing the cards is that a great deal of the cards in the Major Arcana exist in relationship to the other cards, and this is where the most salient meanings of the cards are to be found. Number 2, developing a sense for the relationships between the cards and the qualitative differences among the relationships can deepen one's understanding of the cards while sharpening one's ability to think symbolically. Number 3, as stated in last week's episode, the consideration for which elements, when combined, create harmony and or disharmony is the objective of this mini-series. And lastly, remember the analogy of the cards being at a dinner party with one another, and imaginatively consider whether the cards in discussion will get on well with one another, or will they be at odds with one another. So these people have a conversation and have lots to talk about, many similarities, or they come from such different walks of life that they'll have nothing in common and want to immediately end the conversation. Okay, so a bit about the methods of comparison that I chose to use for the cards this week. For the cards which will be discussed tonight, I employed 2 methods of comparison discussed last week: the numerological method of comparison and the astrological method of comparison. The numerological method of comparison, as outlined in full last week, has it that the card with the higher numerical value can be reduced to a whole number between 1 and 9. Thus, the devil card being the 15th card, 15, or 1 plus 5, reducing to 6, and the lover's card being the 6th card. This method gives rise to the relationship between the two cards numbered 15 and 6 by reducing the higher card to the lower. Okay. The astrological method of comparison, which I will go more deeply into later in the presentation, has it that the planets and signs of the zodiac, which are linked with the cards of the Major Arcana, form a system of relationships throughout the cards. Mercury, the card of the magician, plays a key role in each of the cards, which we will discuss tonight. On one hand, the lover's card is the card of the zodiacal sign of Gemini, which is ruled over by the planet Mercury, the planet of the mind. On the other hand, the devil card features the glyph for Mercury over the devil's nave. So the astrological method gives rise to this relationship, which has as its underlying element the planet of Mercury, and which plays a key role in the meaning of each of the cards. Okay, so setting the stage here with just, I kind of set up this presentation with a pretty hefty prelude to the initial, or to the main area of focus. So I want to first lay down a framework in which to have the discussion of these two cards. Since I understand the card of the lovers and the devil as relating two expressions of a similar experience, the experience of the mind and the mind's generation of the sense of self, I think it necessary to first unpack some basic concepts which will be the heart of my presentation: the experience of unification and the experience of separation. With anything discussed beyond this point, I encourage the viewer to bear these concepts in mind constantly, thinking of these as the archetype at the core of the coming conversation, that being the experience of unification and the experience of separation. The goal of this mini-series is to encourage anyone interested in studying the tarot to sharpen their ability to think symbolically. To further unpack what I mean by thinking symbolically and what I intend to expound on in this presentation, I want to first unpack the meanings of the word symbol and its antonym. Okay, so etymology of symbolos, diabolos, and religio. Okay, symbolos is comprised of the prefix sin or sim, which means together and is the prefix of the English word synchronized, and bolos or balin, which means a disc or bolos, where we derive our word ball from. The meaning derived from the etymology of the word symbol is the experience of putting two halves of something together, the uniting of some seemingly opposite and contrary things into one, i.e., the lover and the beloved, male and female, man and God, heaven and hell, the conscious and the unconscious mind, etc. So diabolos, composed of the root dia, which means to move apart or separate, and the same bolos and balin discussed above, then generates the meaning of throwing two opposites further apart from one another. The etymology of this word also generates the English word diabolical and the earlier Latin word diabolos, which is the origin of the name of the devil card in the Tarot Marseille, La Diable, and the word from which the English term devil is derived. Okay, so religio has for its etymological meaning reverence and bond or linkage with man's source. Additional meanings include respect for what is sacred, reverence for the gods, sense of right, moral obligation, sanctity, obligation, and the bond between man and the gods. Just want to check with everybody and make sure that no one has any comments, questions. Is this making sense to anybody?
Yeah, it is. I don't think that it's going to contribute actually, but I believe also it's about desire, both of the cards, the Lovers and the Devil.
Mhm.
But the Lovers may be an expression, a beginning of a more free expression of desire, and maybe within the Devil card, we are somehow trapped by the same type of desire or by the same energy.
Mhm. Yeah, I also just want to say that when I was making this presentation, I was really struggling with what to say and what to leave out. So I kind of I'm trying to set the stage for what I will eventually attempt to unpack, but there's so many facets and aspects of the card that I have to just leave behind. And I think sadly, that's probably one that I have left behind, is how desire is played out in each of the cards. But towards the end of the presentation, I have just an addendum of all the things that I was not able to include, in hopes that we can kind of discuss some of those things. So if I leave behind anything that's extremely vital, please do bring it up.
Well, I keep being reminded of, even though the 6 and 15, 6 is 2 threes, and the 3 is such a powerful number that when it turns into the 9, and if you add one more, would be the Sun card, and like I showed in that card, again, one can see 2 joining figures, but yeah, where the first one is looser, and then the Devil is tied up, and then by the time it unites and it turns into luminosity, the Sun, then it's like the third movement of that sequence that you are introducing. But that's just something that's ringing in my awareness.
Yeah, it is really, really interesting how I was talking about in the previous slide the prefix sin or sim, and that's from the Latin, I believe, but the Greek is sun, S-U-N, just like the sun.
There we go.
And it's also interesting to just go back a couple of slides here and look at the card of the Lovers. I mean, it's very, very similar to the Sun card in the Bota deck. It's like it's just these characters as children. But they are children that come later in the sequence of the tarot. So
exactly,
it makes a different point, perhaps. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So I've included the somewhat dense but highly important exploration of the etymology for the words symbolos, diabolos, and religio, because they are related to the meanings of the cards in discussion tonight. In the case of symbolos, the relationship between opposites is forged and the unification and return to wholeness is possible. This is the experience of the Lover's card. In the case of diabolos, the chasm between opposites is broadened. Separation ensues, and the chance for unification is lessened or outright abolished until a new attitude is born. This state of limbo is the experience of the Devil card. And that's, to me, that seems like a subtle and maybe sometimes glossed over point, but I'm not necessarily saying that the Devil card is in fact the devil in all instances of the Devil card showing up. And that's why I put or outright abolished until a new attitude is born. So I do think that there's a way in which the experience of the Devil card can definitely perhaps torment someone into a new attitude. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's very insightful. It's almost like that is the subtle meaning behind the obvious, that bondage, or you can't move, or all the different things that the devil exhibits. But the subtle meaning, which is let's say an octave high beyond that, is the one that you just shared. It's very wonderful, which also means it can also mean all the other meanings, but it is one higher octave, meaning that until that is changed, that attitude is causing that situation to appear in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's always important to bear in mind that there's so many different levels of interpretation, and one interpretation may ring true at one level, while at a higher or lower level may contradict itself entirely. I think that's kind of the dynamism inherent in some of the tarot cards. Mm-hmm. Or if you think about them as archetypes or archetypal or images of archetypes, what have you, I think a great starting point for understanding any archetype is that it has a positive and a negative pole.
Or in a subtle one as well, which transcends the other two. And I find it really interesting that not only in the numerology, the 6 and the 15, but the devil also plays in the card before and the card after, the 14 card, Temperance, and then the Tower next to it. So that's another layer that's so it's so connected that it allows us to call attention to how interdependent our perception of things really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so going forward here. Okay, so in the case of religio, where we get the word religion and religious from, as a reverential and respectful attitude for the forces which ego consciousness is subordinate to, this is the attitude which calls man closer to the gods and the gods closer to man. In the case of an irreligious sentiment, it is precisely this attitude which widens the gap between the opposites of God and man, or of the lover and the beloved. In this case, religio as an attitude of religiosity and a linkage between man and man's source, not to be confused with religious dogmatism and organized religion. The meanings of religio and the god Eros and his realm of human endeavor are essentially interchangeable.
It's very profound.
So this is a quote from Plato's dialogue, The Symposium, on the so-called god Eros. Okay, so in this dialogue set between a group of dinner guests discussing the nature of Eros, god of love, an erotic and unitive bond between the lover and the beloved, Socrates recounts asking his teacher Diotima, if Eros is not a god, what then is he? To which Diotima replies, a great daimon, or a spirit, Socrates. Spirits are midway between what is divine and what is human. He acts as an interpreter and means of communication between gods and men. He takes requests and offerings of the gods to the gods and brings back instructions and benefits in return. Occupying this middle position, he plays a vital role in holding the world together. He is the medium of all prophecy and religion, whether it concerns sacrifice, worship, incantations, or any kind of divination or sorcery. There is no direct contact between God and man. All association and communication between them, waking or sleeping, takes place through Eros. This kind of knowledge is knowledge of the spirit. Any other knowledge is purely utilitarian. Such spirits are many and varied, and Eros is one of them. So this compared with the etymological meanings of symbolos and religio are strikingly similar. And it's also worthy of note that the line here, he plays a vital role in holding the world together. He is also the medium of all prophecy and religion.
Can you unpack when it says such spirits are many and varied, meaning that the arrows can present itself in many ways, of many roads to contact the God?
Well, not necessarily. The dialogue, the symposium, is written by Plato, but it's conveyed through the means of Socrates. So Socrates is kind of the main character, and he goes to this dinner party with a group of, the learned men in Greece, and they sit around and have lots of drink and food and kind of pontificate on the nature of love. And as the dialogue goes on, each speaker begins with saying, this is what Eros is to me. And they start with very practical explanations of what they think Eros is to them, until Socrates finally goes at the end and gives this hugely triumphant and comprehensive definition of what he thinks Eros is. And, I'm sure that you know what the Socratic method is, or you may have heard me talk about it on the presentation that I gave on the Fool several months back. But he essentially uses his Socratic method to say, oh, well, I don't really know anything about what Eros is, but I will kind of pick apart some of what you said. So everyone is essentially saying that Eros is a god, that he has to be beautiful, that he has to be a god reigning over desire and love and all of this stuff. And kind of just to take one line of his overall point, he says that, okay, if a man is strong and a great warrior, does that mean that he also simultaneously desires to be strong and to be a great warrior? We always long for what we are not, more or less. So it must stand to reason that Eros is not a god, and that he's not beautiful, and that he may be forever a beggar, ugly, forgotten, and more of a spirit or a daimon than a god at all. And then he goes on to talk about his kind of spiritual teacher, a woman which he learned about Eros from, Diotima. And this is her answer to what Eros is. And she says, a great daimon, Socrates. Daimon means spirit. So I say all of that because this is written by Plato, and Plato also had, in one of his books, I believe it's in the Republic, a myth called the myth of E-R, where he kind of gives this cosmological image of every person coming into the world with their own daimon, very similar to the concept of like a guardian angel. So while the Greeks had their 12 Olympian gods and a whole myriad of other gods, they also kind of had a belief that each person has something of a spirit attached to them. So I think that's the reason for saying such spirits as Eros are many and varied, and Eros is one of them. And it brings up a larger point that they're attempting to make, that, I think Plato and Socrates were the first people to use the term philosopher, which means philo Sophia, lover of Sophia, lover of wisdom. So he's attempting to say inadvertently in this dialogue that Eros is the god of philosophers. If philosophers love wisdom, then Eros has to be the means through which the wisdom of the gods is conveyed to man. Anyways, it looks like Raquel has her hand up.
Thank you for that.
I just have a quick question about, do you work with the idea, Nick, that Socrates is actually a part of Plato and not an actual human being that existed? Because There's this idea that Socrates is actually his alter ego or something. And that is my first question. And the second question that I have is, you said in the beginning of your presentation, the correlations with both of these cards with Mercury.
Mhm.
And I just wanted to know that if that part of the conversation between two beings or more, which is the base of Greek philosophy, and especially in that part, it's always about dialogues.
Mhm.
So you have to be with someone else. And it struck me that both of these cards are two people, you know, and maybe creating this dialogue between these two beings that you have inside of yourself. Just, is that the link with the Mercury archetype?
Well, that's not exactly what I'm driving at. Let me go forward here just so I can show you kind of my reason for including that. So the Magician card is the card of the planet Mercury. The Lover's card is the card of the sign Gemini. And the Devil card is technically the sign of Capricorn. But on the Knave here, it's got the Mercury, the symbol of Mercury. So I kind of just use that as a loose way to forge a connection between these two cards. And then, you know, he also has the symbol of Saturn in his hand. So there's a couple of different ways that you could twist that. That's what you are saying is not exactly what I was driving at, but I think that's a really great point. And to answer the question about Plato and Socrates, I've definitely, you know, kind of gone into some of my own speculation about that, but it's not completely clear. I think the reason that people say that is because that Socrates didn't write anything down. So nobody knows if the guy really existed or not. But at the same time, you know, it very easily could be Plato's mouthpiece, or you could think of Socrates as Plato's daimon. I don't know, you know, I don't think either one really adds or detracts from what either of them have to say, but it's definitely an interesting thing to think about.
And Nick, what about the concept of prophecy and either one of them being a prophet? When you talked about the spirit being a medium,
Mm-hmm.
Are they talking about, whether they are one or two people, Plato and Socrates, are they talking about their role as prophets in a way? Or does prophecy play a part in this examination, in the Socratic method, in like they were the ones who first used the term philosophy? I mean, were they being prophetic in terms of loving wisdom?
Yeah, I don't know.
I just mean in terms of what you're looking at and how you're interpreting these cards, whether prophecy has a role in it.
I don't know that I gave that much thought to that particular aspect of the inclusion of the statement. The reason that I included this is because I was saying that, you know, with the etymology of symbolos and diabolos, you essentially have one word that means unification, bringing together of two disparate and disconnected things. And with diabolos, you have the experience of separation, of pushing two things further apart. And religio was very, very similar to symbolos in that it describes kind of this experience of, or a dimension of experience which links man back to his source. So that was kind of what I was driving at with including symbolos and religio together. And I just realized as I was putting that in that religio kind of is interchangeable with this description given of eros.
Nick, There's a question on YouTube which deserves your comment.
Okay.
It is, can it be that Socratic is to Plato same as Jung is to Nietzsche in terms of continuation of the idea?
The Socratic to Plato as Jung is to Nietzsche in terms of continuation of the idea. You know, I don't know. I mean, I think that that's, you know, probably there may be something to that, but I don't know.
Can I try to answer?
Oh, please. Yeah, please. Please take the ball.
I believe that Nietzsche had a very negative way of looking at life itself as a whole. And while Jung actually tried to save pieces and parts of humanity, and I think that Nietzsche just dropped that down, you know, like, yeah, we have no salvation. Even though Jung actually took a lot of Nietzsche's thoughts and writing, but he turned it into something else, because Nietzsche has that power within his writing, because even though he persistently don't believe in humanity, in his writings there is hope somehow. Yeah. I believe, and I think that is the part that Jung actually carried through and made it into something different, I think.
I'll chime in a little something here, which kind of modernizes all this connection. I mean, Raquel made a point about it. I'm just sort of bringing it back when she mentioned that there was a dialogue between them, and if this was these two people are having an inner dialogue between themselves, and in some way it is symbolic of the harmonization of the right brain and the left brain, that when they're harmonized together inside the being, that something else takes place. So now that we know neuroscience, a lot of the symbology is quite apropos. And Jung came into it. He realized that the symbology was pointing to something which allowed humans to transcend, and transcend is related to the unification of the feminine and masculine and the right and left side of the brain working together through all these channels.
So is Socrates the master and Plato is the emissary?
Yeah, the bridge. He's the bridge that's allowing it to create homeostasis. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, these are great questions, and I wish I had better answers to give, but I sadly don't. You know, it's a huge area of speculation. My knowledge is not.
It's all the philosophers since Socrates have been trying to figure that out. So I don't think we're going to cover it in a live stream on the Tarot tonight. That would be
okay. So let's march forth here. So the last thing I said was this compared with the etymological meanings of symbolos and religio are strikingly similar. But also one thing that occurred to me is this compared with the angel and the lover's card is a particularly fruitful comparative image. So I was kind of thinking, well, you know, there's a striking similarity between this angel that's putting his hands out over these lovers. I mean, I don't think it's an image of God necessarily, but it's almost like he is this middle point, this interpreter and means of communication between gods and men. Okay, so let's get into the cards. Gilda, I can't hear what you're saying.
Both are above the human and larger than human in their physical depictions. Here in the devil, it's interesting how it still puts the pentagon here, and the
I mean, the
lovers.
pentagram.
Yeah, yes, and the lovers, it's pointing down,
Yeah.
and then two of the corners are pointing up, meaning it's receiving and moving down, and
Mhm.
the lovers are completely, it's got the sun. It's a circle that radiates everywhere. Here is bounded, here is open, ready to, I suppose, start.
Mm. Yeah, there's just one other thing that's occurring to me now that may be worth saying about the Socrates to Plato as Nietzsche to Jung. And I think that there is something to that, but I also kind of tend to disagree with that, because I think that people overemphasize the influence that Nietzsche had on Jung. And also, Nietzsche genuinely hated Plato and Socrates. He really, really despised their method of philosophy, because Socrates in particular was one of the first philosophies to say that one could essentially reason up to the gods, that one could use logic to gain an understanding of the gods. And Nietzsche really despised that, which is, what eventually led to his idea that God is dead and you have killed him.
That brings us back to Mercury, that to reason with God, which is showing up in all these three cards, is the Mercury god, is the one that reasons and delivers messages.
Yes, and the point that I hope to make with the Mercury thing is essentially that a reasonable mind, a reasonable capacity for reason, is only reasonable when it can acknowledge its limitations and not think that it can simply reason up to God.
And when can it unite with this heart center and all its other centers? When it's unified.
Okay, so let me get into some of this. So the Magician card is kind of the centerpiece here. So I'm going to start with the text that's below the Magician. The eternal mage of I, the eternal image, the magician, as Mercury and the mind, the generator of self and the I am. And then on the right, and I also think I kind of allude to this at several different points, but I think it's really interesting that, the magician's hands point up and down. And, I think generally people always say, yeah, as above, so below. And that's all fine and well, but I kind of thought it was interesting to note that the magician points up and down to say that one is above the other in some way. The devil also points up and down, which seems to say that one or the other is above one or the other. But it's only the angel in the in the Lover's card that seems to hold both hands at an equal height to say that man and woman are even in this endeavor. They're equal in this endeavor, and they're two parts that matter equally to one another. Okay, so above the Lover's card, a unitive attitude of mind which acknowledges its subordination to transpersonal centers of power greater than itself. Thus, this attitude is reverential and bears witness to forces which it cannot understand, while acknowledging the limits of its very ability to understand the powers that be. As an aside, understanding is an all too apt way of putting the notion that this attitude knows it will always stand under and never over the mysteries to which it owes its very existence. Switching to the Devil card, a separative attitude of mind which bears no witness to anything as being greater than itself, and thus is superordinate to all. The world is only what I can verify as true with my limited modes of apprehension and understanding. Compared with the understanding of the Lover's card, this could easily be defined as an overstanding, resolutely supreme in one's power and unrelated to anything larger than oneself. Hold on 1 second, guys. Let me see if I can get my dogs to stop going crazy back here.
They're chiming in right here. Bring on the arrows. If if you can only get Raquel's cats to meow.
They really don't actually that much, only when they are hunting each other
Mhm.
at the middle of the night. Then they're meowing all the time.
All right, sorry about that. I just had to go shush them
Yes.
up.
So in all these comparisons, I keep wanting to go back to this is the trilogy, and the actual manifestation is the sun card, where the two again become under the light and under a circle that has been manifested. Because here in the lovers, we see half circle.
Yeah.
But in the sun card, the circle is full, is complete. That stands above the head. And there's no deity. There's only the circle filled, radiating. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I've got to say, I feel a little bit sad at the missed opportunity to include that card, but I'm glad that you're here to point it out. That's a very astute observation.
Yep, here it is.
Yeah, I think I may have that on my computer, so maybe it's some.
I haven't colored it.
I can pull it out.
I've had this deck forever. And I just never knew that. So I'm wanting to color it one day. But there it is. That's the promise that then at judgment time, the next card, we get elevated into the cosmic realm, ready for another birth into the universe. But now that you mentioned, I would not have put it together had I not witnessed your presentation. But when you did, and I had that dream, I said, oh, and the fact that I read that Paul Casey mentioned that he was setting straight what was not straight in the deck, the images, and he added a male and a female. Clearly, they have different hairdos. One has long hair, the other one has short hair. So it is a male and a female, and also you can tell that their bodies are male and female. So it's not that they're both males. No, they're male and female. You don't see that anywhere. All the time, there's either the child riding the horse, or I saw in another old, like two males or whatever. So the male female combination somehow got lost somewhere along the way. And there's no longer a human, a being up here, no devil or saint or trying to conjure. It's already illuminated, bursting with luminosity, which is the sun card. And it's 3 to the third power, 3, 3, 3. So it's 3 manifested plus 1. So it's a 10. It again brings it back to another round, which is what death does. And judgment is 2 10s, right? So it's a full round, and it's all those 3s play a role.
Yeah. Okay, let me go on here. All right, so starting with the magician card here. In the previous card, in the previous slide rather, the title given to the magician was the eternal image, or the eternal mage of I. The reason for this is quite simple. The mind, the realm of Mercury, is the very thing that generates the thought, I am. Most people can think of the time in childhood at which they suddenly realized they were an individual, separate from their parents and their environment. This is the birth of self-consciousness and self-awareness, or the development of the ego, etc. It is the dawning of a sense of self, of a separate and distinct identity, which continually changes, yet is eternally present throughout the lifespan. This development usually issues from a disidentification with the parents and the assumption of independence and power in the psyche of the child. Forged through successive stages of alienation and identification, this sense of self is fortified eternally. This is the experience at the bottom of the magician, and this is the experience which is common to both the lovers and the devil card. But the question, then, is to what end is this process of identification and alienation which generates selfhood followed to? Does one understand and acknowledge the ego's smallness in relation to the powers that be? Or does one assume a godlike status and bear witness to nothing greater than itself, resulting in total egocentricity? So
Well,
that's
here's where the sun comes in. It fits so well because it answers that question, that we no longer need to, that all that separation ends up in, by the time the whole journey is crossed to card 19, the 3 threes plus 1, then their liberation occurs and they go back, the religio, they go back to being children with an absolutely radiant sun above, symbolically meaning, complete radiance without any hook or attachment to the to the deity as a form, as a human form.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say all day, but not quite getting. That's it. No, yeah, I'm really glad that you're here to make that point because it felt like I was just getting a lot of stuff, but there was something that wasn't quite coming through. And I think that's the next step. And it's really great that you tie that together with the religio etymology.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, Nick, I'd like you to release your share for a moment because I want to share something too. And
no can do, Skip. Sorry.
okay.
Here we go.
Yeah, right. Okay. Okay. The question is, who has the power? Okay, so the magician is for all of us, and all of us are in the eternal moment at every moment ever. And so I want to talk with you for a minute about the eternal moment, because what the magician represents is the fact that each of us sits at the intersection of the rest of our lives in every moment of the day. I'm just looking for my quote of the eternal moment, but it's coming. Anyway, each of us sits at the intersection of the rest of our lives. So we all have, in every moment, the assets in front of us that we need to proceed. And so symbolically, the magician has in front of him everything that he needs. And he then selects from the things on the table what he will use to progress his life. And so finally I found it. And so I'm going to share my screen just for a moment so that you understand this Jung quote, since this is a Jung channel, because this is essentially what the magician is doing, and it applies to all of us. The great thing is now and here. This is the eternal moment. And if you do not realize it, you have missed the best part of life. You have missed the realization that you were once the carrier of life, contained between the poles of an unimaginable future and an unimaginably remote past. Millions of years and untold millions of ancestors have worked up to this moment, and you are the fulfillment of this eternal moment. You should take every moment as the eternal moment, as if nothing were ever going to change, not anticipating a faraway future. For the future always grows out of what is, or that which is. You must live life in such a spirit that you make in every moment the best of the possibilities. So basically, the point is that the magician there, you can take the screen back now. The magician is standing in front of the table and he has to select the best of the possibilities. And that magician is all of us in every moment of our lives. And so it's something to think about, because to make that connection, because we control what the rest of our life will be in every moment. And whatever we choose in the possibilities, if we choose the wrong possibility, it's going to affect the rest of our lives, no doubt, right down the line. And so that's what that card is about, among other things, but that's certainly what it's about from a Jungian perspective.
Okay, any other comments, observations, questions?
We'll just say that this card also, because it has at the bottom and at the top flowering flora, also is another call for us to consider that above and below, or the unity, whenever there is that separation of opposites, it is only the other side of the coin, because it's one and the same.
Yeah, and as I said, there's several things that I had to omit from this, and it's kind of one-sided in that I present kind of an experience of unification or unitive consciousness as the positive side to this, and separative experience as the negative side. But that's not always the case. There's certainly situations in which separation is required and probably the thing to strive for.
So Nick, on the YouTube channel, you have made the assertion that Plato was a Republican. Would you defend that position, please?
Oh, I was just trying to make a joke, but he did write a book called The Republic.
Yes, he did.
So
in that sense, he was a Republican, certainly.
Yeah, I'm just messing around now.
Yeah.
Okay. So
we don't want to confuse our uninformed guests on YouTube.
Yeah.
About their lives.
Certainly not. Okay. All right. So that previous card and what I had down is kind of the template for exploring these other two cards. So the Lover's card, and in this case, it is a sense of self properly constituted and in relation to powers greater than itself. In the case of the Lover's card, following in line with previously offered implications around the card shows a situation in which the subordination or relativization of the ego is illustrated. In the card, the male figure represents the conscious mind, the generator of selfhood, and bears a striking resemblance to the male figure in the Magician card previously discussed. It's also worth pointing out that even something as seemingly inconsequential as the hair color for the given characters, it's apparently very intentional, and there are only a few characters, maybe only the two. Those are the only two that I can pick up that have black hair, and it's the male in this character and the Magician. If somebody can think of another character with black hair, please speak up, but those are only two that come to mind for me. Anyways, okay. So the male figure represents the conscious mind. Yet in this card, the male figure, which represents the conscious mind, gazes into the face of the female figure. The female figure is a representative of the subconscious or unconscious mind, the womb out of which the conscious mind is born, and of which exerts a continued influence on consciousness throughout the lifespan. Here we have the symbolos alluded to in previous slides. The male figure representing the conscious mind is connected to, and perhaps even subordinate to, the greater power of the female figure, which represents the unconscious mind. It is through this conjunctio, this hieros gamos, or this mystical union, that the realization of standing under and not above a transpersonal center of power is possible. The symbolos puts together these two opposites and creates a synthesis. The sense of self is then tethered to something greater than the I. Lover and the beloved are united and know of the connection between heaven and earth, just as the connection of their love for one another. It is no coincidence that many mystics have described the experience of union with God as an ecstatic sexual union with the One. So the whole reason that I said all of that is, if you notice here, the man looks into the face of the woman, and the woman then looks into the face of the angel above her. And as I pointed out in the beginning of the presentation, both the devil and the magician card have one hand pointing upward and one hand pointing downward. And the angel is the only character that, while over two figures or on the card, has the hands evenly placed over both the male and the female figure.
Oh, we really appreciated the extreme subtle reference that you included, that that always standing below is that you actually came to create that union. And in a very hidden way, it points to that lower chakra, let's say, or the sacrum, where the actual co-creation occurs, which is below. And then by the time it travels to the illumination in the head, the form has been dissolved and illuminated. But the form is conceived and created in order to be able to at all have this union be always below. And the devil also has it below. And the sun card also has it below, except it's realized already fully, the circle up above.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for that. I mean, the understanding and standing under is probably the best way I've been able to
yes, very subtle.
Convey some of the meaning of this card. So
Right. So also on the right side, you have the yods, which represent fire and therefore represent creativity symbolically. And on the left side, you have peaches in a peach tree or something like that, which represent manifestation of beauty and manifestation of health and beauty, I would say.
well, there are 5 fruits on the tree, and they're said to represent the 5 senses and the temptation of sensuality.
Mm-hmm.
And the coiled green on the trunk of the tree, is that the snake?
It's a snake. The head goes up just over her shoulder and is whispering into her ear as well.
I'll share that I'm counting the turns of the snake, 1, 2, 3 and a half, and that those are the turns of the Kundalini. It sits 3.5 times, coiled 3.5 times. Just like that one, because that one is, stretched. It's the number 3 again, 3 and then half, which begins the next cycle.
That's all very interesting, and I'm sorry that I have so little to say, but my knowledge is very slight of kind of Eastern mysticism. So
well, we're having a good time sharing. And so we're counting flames, and there's 11 flames.
There's 12, I believe.
Oh yes, there are 12. Okay, so that's 3 again. It's that play on the 3. It's still separated, the 2 and the 1.
Mhm.
And the sun has a complete because the 9 has 3 3s in it.
Okay, I'm going to go to the devil card now. Okay. In the case of the devil card, the sense of self is improperly constituted and in denial of any power greater than itself. In the case of everything stated previously about the lovers, the meaning of religio and eros, and the decentralization of the ego, in the case of the devil, all is upside down. Just as the pentagram, one of the classic symbols for the human, as can be seen in Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, is inverted, so too are all the meanings assigned to the lover's card inverted and perverted in the devil card. Whereas in the lover's card, the man gazes into the face of the woman to effect a union between the two, the symbolos. Here, neither the man nor the woman look to one another, but each look down and image a diabolos, the putting apart and separation. No transpersonal center of power stands over them, but rather, this deified character is best understood as the denier of any such transpersonal center of power and the elevation of the ego to the most central position of power. In the case of the devil card, the ego is the god and master of its own fate, and thus overstands all other than itself. In the lover's card, the ego understands its place on the psychic totem pole. But in the devil card, the ego is paramount. Very little can be said of this card without an understanding of the lover's card, just as very little can be said of anti-religious sentiment before understanding first what is meant by religiosity. For example, theism gives rise to atheism. Religiousness gives rise to the anti-religious. Christ gives rise to the antichrist, and so on. Rather than unifying the opposites of man and woman and what they symbolize psychologically, the separative experience of the devil seeks to heighten the tension between opposites and effect a diabolical splitting rather than a unification of opposites. So I also really just want to emphasize what I've already said yet again, that, I'm really kind of drawing on the negative aspect of this card. And, there's much to be said about what could be positive about the card as well. And in the previous presentation, I said much of what I had to say, or likely what anybody has to say in a presentation like this one, will be subjective. So, it probably leaves a lot to be desired in terms of your own personal opinion and interpretation of the cards. And we all have, a different approach.
I noticed that the lovers, the angel has red wings. So the wings of freedom and flight and unity are red. And here the red is enclosed inside the devil. You can only see the eyes. And that underneath the Mercury head, there's also another. And then the woman that has a tail with the fruit, some red. So the red is separated and distributed along. And in the lovers is the wings. And then in the sun, it's the circle up here. It's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to be said about this card that I kind of had to leave out, but it's worth pointing out that they also have hooves and not feet. Everything about the devil character is carnal and bestial. I mean, it's comprised of a ram, a bat, an eagle, partly human, I guess, in the body. And, these all seem to indicate something subhuman, something below the human realm and something instinctual. And, I didn't go into any of the symbolism and meanings of the Hebrew letters associated with these cards because that could probably generate 10 more slides, but they're very, very meaningful and contribute to the overall meaning of these cards in a really profound way. Okay. So to kind of recap on what I've just gone through and these cards, the key elements in the triad of the magician, the lovers, and the devil are as follows. 1, the sense of selfhood generated by the magician taken to a positive and negative end, just as his hands point upward and downward. The question which follows is what comes of this sense of selfhood? In the case of the lovers, the ego, or center of selfhood, is decentralized and subordinated to powers greater than self, which, if not properly related to, are capable at any point of usurping the supposed supremacy of the ego. Yet, if properly related to, provide the ego with a sense of meaning, telos, and dependence on forces greater than itself, the upward pointing hand of the magician. In the case of the devil, the ego is centralized and thought to be superordinate to all other aspects of the psyche, holier than thou, and eternally supreme. All is subverted and subjugated to the tyrannical rule of the ego, and this is the downward pointing hand of the magician. So now I'd like to just kind of open up the floor to talk about some of these ideas that I had to omit. So given the limitations of format and the amount of time needed to sufficiently unpack the ideas in each presentation, several points of consideration had to be omitted, which I will now include as an addendum and potentials for group discussion. So these were all topics that I had down in my notes that I just couldn't really work in unless this was to be several hours long. So my feeling is that each of these could be a separate presentation where I'm examining the relationship between these two cards through different lenses of meaning. So relatedness versus subjugation and domination, erotic union of lover and beloved versus instinctual and animalistic sexuality and pleasure-seeking behaviors, the conflict between the heightened and seemingly irreconcilable opposites of religion and science, ethical usage of power and resources versus exploitative usage of power and resources, the devil as an agent of God. Does the devil work for himself or for God? And the serpent in the garden over the shoulder of the female lover as tempter toward greater consciousness, a Promethean sentiment. So do any of you have any thoughts on any of these topics?
I'll share something that you walked us through from the magician into the lovers, which is the possibility of this fruitful union, and into the devil, which contains it for selfish ends. It's kind of apparent, and there's no connection to the three there, right? So there's just this one ruling. There's no interaction between three and the devil. They're there, but they're bounded. And so, again, I'll just bring the card of the sun, that all of this gets into a full circle of realization and brightness once it transcends the separation that started from the beginning. And then once it moves from the devil card to the sun card, then the ethics come on board, the compassion and all of the different things, because one no longer needs to look for it. It is embodied in the luminosity. So it is ongoing and body, which is what Skip mentioned that the magician promised he could do by utilizing all of these pieces on the table. So that sort of wraps it for me in you know, by including the sun, which is the 4, and it goes back to the emperor, who, you know, has concretized something, a structure that has rules, but it also can transcend to the next thing, which would be 5, the Hierophant. And here the sun, by the time it gets to judgment, is already moving on to another dimension. The next dimension of life, because completed is round of 3s. Whereas if it stays only at the devil card, if after is moved from all the different numbers, if it remains in a devil card, it's not yet free to access being able to relate to all of these things in ways which are aligned with God. So it's still trying to find that, or dialoguing enough, long enough to create that which it knows has this power of illumination, which the sun card shows. And oddly enough, the completion of the circle, which does not feature in the other cards. In the magician, it is the number 8, which is the inclusion of eternity, but in the sun, it actually has a completed circle, which is, you know, in sacred geometry, the circle is the most perfect form.
Yeah, I really hope at some point, maybe I'll do this, or it would be great if one of you would consider doing this. But, you know, one thing that I've never really seen anybody give much thought to is the lemniscate, or the infinity symbol, over both the strength card character and the magician character. I think that could really yield an interesting comparison.
Over the magician and which card?
The magician and the strength card.
Which is number 8. Sometimes they
Right.
put it as 11. It's an
Okay,
8.
well, here's the thing. I can offer you some wisdom. For the magician card, the eternal moment is the point, and that's what the infinity thing means, that we're all at the point of the magician in every moment of our lives, and all of us are. So it goes out to infinity. In the strength card, we all have a balance between who we are, whether we're an infant who has no control over their life theoretically, but actually the infant does have a certain kind of strength, because the infant basically makes itself cute and does lots of other things so that it has adults around it that take care of it. And so whoever we are, wherever we are in the world, we all have a balance between you know, the lion that will eat us and the lion that is tamed and we control. And that's what the infinity, and that's in every moment. And so that's what the infinity symbol says to me in those 2 cards. My opinion only, so you take it or leave it.
I will share just some underpinnings from numerology. That's why I was so interested in this presentation, which connects numerology. That 17, which is 7 and 1, which also adds up to 8, is the star. It's a something in the darkness that shows light. And 7, it is a number that it has fully realized from 1 to 7. But it also adds 1, which is it functions fully realized, but it needs to move to the next step. And it's a immortality is the number. 17 is a number of immortality. So infinity is also the number of immortality, except in the 17 is functioning as a fully realized alignment plus the next thing. As a human being, fully aligned, human being and fully aligned, that makes that combination move to the next thing. So I'm just playing around with numbers, the 8 and 17, since we always reduce the number to the lowest denominator. So that 7 is all 7 chakras and then 1 again. So it's once you finish, but you're still in the human body. So that's 1 more. Once you've traversed all the powers up to the crown, that's immortality. So that is the number of power. 8 is in many books is the number of power. Double 4. So 4 is the emperor structure. And when you double that, is 8. 2 structures is in balance are very powerful. So the infinity is 2 connected exactly the same. So that makes it very powerful. And there's no 3 that so it's double 4. So maybe that's kind of like when you mentioned when Skip mentioned that how you use the lion power for good or bad or whatever. When it's connected in the center, then it becomes power, working balanced. But power, no doubt, 8 is the number of power.
Yeah, and if you don't think an infant has that balance of power, just wait till you're a parent and you're alone in the room with an infant that will not stop screaming. That's a reality check. You will do anything to make that child happy.
Well, I would really love to pick one of these bullet points here and kind of just have some general discussion. Do any of these grab the attention of any of you?
I think that's better if you go back some slides
Okay.
when the 3 cards are together. I think that we can discuss better watching the cards.
Do you want the one with the text? Because I also have this one.
Oh, this one is good.
Cool.
Because it's just a commentary actually. The hands of the magician, it's in the same way in the devil's card, because he's also like one hand up above and the other one down. He's lighting the fire within the active side, because I think that if, the lovers and the devil represents different parts of the same entity, even though it's female and male, but also I think a spiritual connection itself, because we can say that it's the daimon within the cards actually, that's inside one human being. So if you can correlate different parts of yourself and connect yourself to God, you can also create relationships with other people. That is one thing that I get from both of these cards. But from the devil, I think he's just lighting up one side of the spectrum, while the female side that has the fruit that Gilda talked about, the red fruit coming out of her, of her tail. It's in the hand that has Saturn symbol, I think.
Yeah.
So it's the destruction from one point and the structure in the other hand. Because I think that these three cards, if you go like continue the passage from the cards in the Major Arcana, then comes the Tower, then comes the Sun card that Gilda has been talking about very much in this evening, which is great because then comes the Tower, where the destruction of the last structure, and then in the Sun card, it doesn't matter which gender that you have because you go back to a point where you hold. And I think this is why also the Sun card correlates to children and not to grown-ups anymore.
Yeah, I think that that's a really salient point, and I was actually rather conflicted about the stuff that I put about male and female, and I wanted to also just add that when I say that, I mean that it's an intra-psychic situation, that this is all happening within the context of one person, and it's relevant to man or woman. I think it's just an image of psychological or psychic development that all people go through. And I'm not saying that, you know, you have to seek out a heterosexual relationship in order to have that.
No,
So that was why I chose
absolutely.
to say beloved or lover and beloved.
No, I completely understand that. I just, what I think it's interesting because all your presentation, Nick, is about some way or another about conversation between opposites, but opposites that are internal to a person. But I think that even in the Lover's card, the Devil card has that image of lighting up something more intensely, I think, because it comes from the entity. The fire comes from the entity, like he's burning up the tail of the male. But in the Lover's card, the male part is also burning up. So I think the two opposites that we can correlate as well, not just male and female, is the destruction and the creation that comes together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also interesting that, you know, the tree behind the male and the Lover's card is, you know, it's barren. It has no fruit. It's literally on fire. I think that there's something in there about an overemphasis of kind of solar ego-oriented consciousness, that, you know, an influx of the sun or overemphasis of the sun just burns things up, and without it being balanced by lunar consciousness, then it's one-sided and yields no fruit.
And it's interesting how the background of the devil is black. So it's just, but he's carrying, see the angel's wings are red, and the magician's is he's wearing the possibility of the red that he sees above and below, because the fruits, the flowers are red, and below you will also have the red. So here the red goes into also 3, the fire burning and the fruits. And when I add up 12 and 5 is 17 again. 17, I was talking about the star, that 7 is a fully realized 7 chakras plus 1 more that creates the power, number 8. So that's interesting, because it seems to me that all this numerology is embedded in everything here. So it was carefully chosen to put 12 fiery pieces there and 5 fruits. And then in the devil, it's contained. It hasn't yet been able to see the light. It's contained and unreal, unable to open into something. So the form is contained into form, and that is where it remains. And when that happens, it has no possibility of interaction or taking the third thing somewhere where something else can happen. So it can only happen when it can be seen in the light. So here it's hidden, but you know, that white coming out of his mouth and the pentagram, he's carrying it, but it's still contained and chained, basically.
Yeah. There is a comment on the YouTube channel here, and I, admittedly kind of wanted to take up this topic for discussion. Someone on the chat says the devil as an agent of God sounds really interesting. That's one of the omitted topics down here. So the devil as an agent of God. Does the devil work for himself or for God? I was trying to make a point with that, which I put in the devil card. Let's see if I can track this down. Okay, so about halfway through where I say, no transpersonal center of power stands over them, but rather this deified character is best understood as the denier of any transpersonal center of power and the elevation of the ego to the most central position of power. So what I was trying to say with that is that really the thing that I pick up on in most kind of anti-religious sentiment is it's not necessarily a belief system, or I say anti-religious, or any kind of like modern day Luciferianism or worship of Baphomet or whatever. This is not necessarily some separate belief system. It seems almost as if it's rather a belief in nothing. Like it seeks to subvert the idea of religion and God, or whatever your preferred nomenclature, to the belief of nothing, and that nothing replaces that. So I think it brings up a bigger question, that is the devil, as we commonly understand him, an agent of God? Does the devil work for himself and serve his own ends, or does he ultimately in some form or fashion serve a purpose? And if he serves a purpose, then I think it's only one or two steps away from that than asking, well, does he work for himself or for God? So I'd be interested to hear what you all have to say about that.
I have like an outsider perspective of this major Catholic perspective, because here in my country, we all are somewhat we live influenced by religions, Afro-religions, even the ones created here in Brazil, or even the ones that came from Africa, usually from the Yoruba ethnic group. And we all have this idea that when you talk about the devil only exists in religions that there is a God, one God. So yeah, I think he is an agent of God, because their two are combined. There is the devil as that entity only exists in those Catholic religions. I mean, or I don't know how to say that specific Western type of religion, but there is no parallel. I think you will not find a devil within an Afro-religion perspective. And I don't think that you find a devil in Eastern religions as well.
Well, there are definitely other evil deities, but it is certainly, and it's probably it reaches its culmination in the Christian ethos. Certainly, the contrast is most stark between good and evil in Christianity or the Judeo-Christian myth.
Mhm.
And somebody in the chat here, I think, is more or less picking up on what I'm driving at, and it's the idea of the kind of theological area of debate of the privatio boni or the summum bonum, which is just an idea that either God had to have created the devil, or that the devil exists in opposition to God and is born of either an admixture of elements which God had no idea of. And it's kind of a rabbit hole. I mean, volumes and volumes have been written on that. I mean, theologians, philosophers, even Jung himself took an interest in writing about it. But I think it's really interesting to think about, because it brings up the question that either the devil is a separate entity working for his own means to just corrupt things and enact the battle between evil and good in the world, or he's in some way created by God and an agent of God and serves some purpose or some purposive end. And I don't know where I fall. I was just interested to hear what we all have to say about it, because
I can pick it up now.
Say what?
I can pick it up from what Raquel mentioned. These are one historical things where one religion, in order to create another one, makes the devil out of the other one's God, and out of the other one's God makes the devil, and so on. And I believe that Christianity, devils and angels are the opposite of Judaism, and they are both come from the same place. They're all part of the same thing. Like one is chastity, and the other one celebrates love and bounty and all of these different things. And I believe the devil acts like the check and balance. If there wasn't any, then there wouldn't be this back and forth duality. So that's how that was created. Like, for example, we heard a joke the other day by George Carlin. I thought that this represents what I'm trying to say here. And he said he's talking about religion. And he says, for example, in the Catholic Church, you go in and the men have to take off their hats, and the women cover their head with a veil, or with a little thing with a veil. Now, in the Jewish tradition, the men wear a yarmulke, and the women uncover their head. So it's exactly the opposite. So here we go. What I was trying to say, that one is the opposite of the other, but they both come. They're both come from the same place, and that's what they call Judeo-Abrahamic traditions. And the Christian and the Jewish and the Jewish resemble that to perfection.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's not an actually opposite, because in Afro religions, there is no devil. There is no that aspect of which I believe that may be like an exclusive entity of evil or some sort of controlling. There isn't a parallel. There's just not exist, because what I wanted to try to bring to this discussion is that this is a very marked question, I think, because from an outsider, to me, the answer is more simpler, even though a lot of people have written about it and discussed about that question.
Well, the Afro religion, it's not Judeo-Christian. We brought those two because they're the clarity.
I'm just saying that when you said that a lot of one religion comes from the opposite of another.
Mhm.
And yeah,
They're
that is,
created.
yeah, but that is a Western
Yes, absolutely.
type of knowledge and thinking. And
That's where the devil comes from. So
Well-
that's why I mentioned it.
If I may, I want to just bring up a couple of points. The first thing that I would say is, while I tend to agree that it's something of a rabbit hole, I do think it's a worthy question of asking. And also, so many other careful thinkers throughout history have attempted to answer the same question. No sufficient or satisfactory answer, I think, will ever be given until we die and we find out for ourselves, and then we won't be able to tell everybody. But the interesting thing is that, in religion, at least interesting to me, in religions which don't necessarily have a very poignant point of reference for evil, it leaves something to be desired, sadly, because evil exists in the world. I mean, it's the type of thing that, like, okay, if in whatever pantheon, whether it be Greek or any kind of Afro religion or any kind of Egyptian religion, whatever. And I would also add that, even in Egyptian religion, there are deities for evil. I mean, there's Set, which is, pretty similar. Not all too similar, but definitely a god which is kind of antagonistic to the savior deity Horus. But anyways, I think it's worth considering, what do we do for evil when we don't necessarily give it a proper representative? Like, I know that a long time ago in a presentation, I included a quote, and I don't know who it's by. I actually know it from a movie, and I'm sure it's attributed to somebody, but I don't know who it is. But it goes something like, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled on mankind was to trick everybody into believing he didn't exist. And while that might seem somewhat facile, I think that's really at the heart of this question. And I think it's worth the consideration, at least. I don't know if anyone can arrive at an answer, but I really do think that it's not just some meaningless polemical argument that theologians and philosophers have engaged in for hundreds of years.
I think it's an archetype. It's the archetype of the opposite of God. So when it's represented and given a space, then human being can reflect and check and balance when faced with
And
devilish kind of ways.
this question kind of then lends itself to the bullet point which follows it. And, that's kind of the Judeo-Christian question, or one of the Judeo-Christian defining questions. But then, since I have the serpent in the garden over the shoulders of the female lover as tempter toward greater consciousness, I mean, that's the Gnostic view of the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And I mean, the Gnostics were known for just taking the exact same corpus of religious thought, which is in the Bible, and interpreting it differently. So they actually understood the serpent as being the very thing which precipitates the fall, but also makes redemption possible. And, doesn't necessarily keep Adam and Eve in this blissful garden, essentially high on the fruits of the Garden of Eden. And I think that's another really interesting question. And let's see here. So maybe we can kind of seg into that. Because, I have a Promethean sentiment after that. And I think that it's very, very similar to the story of Prometheus.
Yeah, he's like an agent and like an engine that causes things to move. And by embodying the definition of what that may look like, then he causes the duality of to come to a head and have to move to the next step. So in a way, had he not embodied it so precisely in opposition, it might not have been seen. So by him doing so, then something can happen next in order to move. You know, it's kind of like he's a moving agent. So the next card is, of course, a tower. So obviously it causes some movement, because if there is no movement, then everything is static. There is no narrative, there's no story, and life is a narrative story. So he's one of the protagonists that causes things to move. To our you know, oh, we get upset about it, but it definitely causes things to move.
Yes, I mean, I think that's probably the best way to put it, is it kind of sets the cosmic scheme in motion.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas before it would have just been a state of blissful stillness and rest. And in that light, you know, that gives new meaning to what the role the serpent may have played in the story that we're all familiar with. And
he does it in using duality, which is duality is found all across the cards, the opposition, the negative to positive, the female to male, the good, bad. I mean, we live in opposition is what makes things move. Only by transcending that, I believe that when that's card number 19, the sun, then we die, but we live in a perpetual state of duality. And that's represented symbolically here with the different characters.
If you look to all the cards of the Major Arcana, if you do believe that there is a cosmic understanding or flow of energy and life, and the tower comes after the devil card, then probably the devil is the agent of God, because there has to be also a reason for the need of destruction of a structure, you know. And then you can go through the other cards, but I don't. I think that if you say it, Gilda.
No,
go.
That these cards represent life, and it also tells us that our own bodies will one day be destroyed and spirit continues. So in that esoteric part, it also, the devil plays a part that, you know, if we hold on too much to this body, it needs to be, one day will be destroyed. There is no doubt about that. So this in that way, he also represents that to hold on to it as the thing above you that gives you life, sort of stops your life from eventual transcendence. Which
yeah,
is,
I think the tarot answer might be different from the kind of more conventional answer of, does the devil work for himself or for God? Or is the devil, you know, an agent of God? I think in the case of tarot, at least as I understand it, I would tend to agree that the devil has to be an agent of God, or some meaningful scheme that's eventually redirecting things back upwards and not continually subverting and subjugating things. But I think in the kind of traditional argument, it's much more complex than that. I don't know if they overlap with one another in the way that I thought they may when I asked the question.
Assuredly, you're right, Nick. And one of the aspects of the devil that I rarely hear mentioned is the fact that the chains on the two individuals are loosely tied. So they can take those chains off anytime they want. You know, it's like an alcoholic who is chained to alcoholism, but that alcoholic can take off those chains anytime by starting to go to a 12-step program, for example, and taking it seriously. And so, yeah, the devil is very definitely a part of our lives, and we have to see it that way. I mean,
Yeah, I think also to that end, you know, he's standing on something that he could probably, with the slightest change of wind, be blown off of. You know, he's not very stable in his position of power on this thing.
absolutely true. Absolutely true. He's not stable, and he can be blown off. I mean, we're going to see this in the next 18 months in our politics. It's going to very clearly happen and manifest. But you know, but the point, I think the point is that, you know, fundamentalists say the Bible is 100% true. And I say, yes, I agree with you. Right. And it is 100% true. But, you know, we'd have to have a 3-hour discussion to see why I say it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I always feel the need to say this, and you know, probably touching on some of my own personal issues, but you know, I don't really relate to the traditional and conventional understandings of Christianity and religion, and so everything that I say about this is kind of my subjective and somewhat idiosyncratic interpretation of all this stuff. So, you know,
Yeah, well,
I'm not a creationist necessarily.
My rabbi friend, who was the president of the World Union of Progressive Jews, a group of 1.4 million people, said quite clearly in his book, Finding Ourselves in Biblical Narratives, that the story of Abraham and Isaac in the Bible represents the end of human sacrifice in our species, at least in the West. That's what it did. And that was because Abraham had the vision or the insight that told him he didn't have to murder his son. He could sacrifice a goat instead. Simple as that.
I mean, I'm not denying the profound insights that can also be gleaned from biblical story and allegory and what have you. It's also really interesting. I mean, this is, you know, going off topic now, but I months ago when I had to read the story of Jason and the Argonauts, I was really struck by the beginning of that story and how similar it is to the story of Abraham and Isaac. I mean, like with all the stuff about the sacrifice and this ram. I mean, that whole story with Jason is about stealing the golden fleece of this ram. And in the beginning of the story of Abraham and Isaac, he's got to like sacrifice his kid, and this ram shows up as a messenger of God and sacrifices the ram instead of his son. And then in the story of Jason and Argonauts, I can't remember all of the details, but it's like an eerily similar beginning to the story. But anyways, that's all that I have prepared for this week. So I hope that was fruitful for some of you. And if we have any questions or comments from the YouTube chat or any concluding thoughts from any of you,
That was yeoman service, Nick. And I think I'm going to leave the my dictum about the 5th in place for now until you come back and tell me you have somebody to cover the 5th.
Okay.
Okay. To include you if you want to do it. But if you were assuming that it wasn't you that was going to cover the 5th, then, let's.
How would we know that it's going to take place if it does take place?
Because I will tell you on a email from MailChimp.
Okay.
But as it stands right now, we're not having a session unless Nick comes to me and tells me that he's got it covered with no sweat, in which case I will send out an email and say, okay, it's on after all, as Nick has requested. But, I don't, since Nick requested that because he wanted something to be covered, but he wasn't planning to be the speaker of that day either. So, we don't have it covered until Nick says it's covered.
Well, that wasn't in the plan, but I definitely don't mind doing that. I have enough, like when I came up with this idea, I just sat down and made a list of all the potential topics we could cover or that I myself may cover. And
Okay,
so I could easily, just formulate something for next week. I mean, I made this presentation today, so.
Yeah.
No
Well,
problem.
let me just say that we have had a tremendous following on YouTube tonight. We've been up to 26 simultaneous users that I've seen. We still have 20 watching, which is huge in terms of my Monday night session for the last 6 years. So my congratulations to you on that. And if we do it next week, just come prepared that the following in the session may be smaller, including the number of people that are in attendance on the panel.
Okay.
Okay. I don't mind saying at this point that I am prepared to start the Zoom up for you.
Okay.
But I'm not going to say that. Officially, we're saying that there's no session on the 5th, but we may change that depending on Nick's decision.
Well,
Okay.
I would like to then just go ahead and say, so we, keep the attention of people who are watching now. I will plan to do a presentation.
Okay.
And I will show up.
Okay. So thank you so much. I will make the change, and I am going to send out a wisdom path notice by this weekend, saying that we will not be having a session the day before on Sunday morning because it's our holiday. And I want to take a holiday if nobody else does.
Duly noted. Yeah, if you just turn on the Zoom, I think we can probably handle it from there.
Right. I mean, if you want to get it in the can, fine, we'll do it. I'm for it.
Cool.
Okay. So thank you, everybody. Nice to see you, Raquel. Nice to see you, Gilda.
Nice to see
Nice
everyone.
to see you.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you're still with us and good cheer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm in good cheer so far.
You're a
there's
tough cookie.
there are a lot of moving parts in my life, I can tell you right now, just a lot of them. I mean, you have no idea, but
We can imagine, yes.
yeah. But what I can tell you is that our confluence next June 10th to the 14th is going to be a barn buster. Be there or be square. You're going to have it, there may be some video out of it, maybe not, but you won't appreciate it without physically being there, period.
I looked up one of the presenters that in one of her videos. She has many videos. Ms. Wong.
Oh, Karen Wong, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Karen Wong will be with us on the 10th of July, but I'm not talking about her appearance. That's a Wisdom Path appearance.
Okay.
What I'm talking about is the conference that which we're calling a confluence, which Tim and I are putting together for next summer.
Oh,
And
next year.
that is going to be a barn burner, but it's only going to be a barn burner for the people who make it there. Well, I'll tell you privately some things that we've agreed to make it more possible for people like Raquel. Let's put it that way. But Raquel, you have to get your government to open the borders, and we have to get our government to open the borders too.
Well, we have to get rid of the president first, which is possible now, at least.
When would you do that?
Get rid of the president?
Yeah, your current president. When do you get rid of him?
Well, the last week, actually, Friday and Saturday, we were struck by a lot of important information of corruption about vaccines and stuff. And we believe now we are at least one step closer to get rid of him, or at least guarantee that next year he won't be reelected.
And when would the election be next year?
October next year. Yeah.
Okay, well, that won't be before our confluence, so.
Yeah, but until then, he's going to be pretty beat down. He already is. So.
Okay, well, as long as he opens the borders and he lets you get your vaccines, that's all I care about. You and
Here in
Emeritus.
Brazil, we are getting vaccination despite of him, because he actually sent it to the governors the responsibility to vaccinate the entire population, and the governors actually led it to the mayors of each city. So yeah, my city actually is vaccinating everyone pretty fast now.
Good.
So there's going to be places where everyone's vaccinated, but I think in the big cities still going to have some problems, but at least
Just get it done as soon as you can, because this Delta virus is coming through and it's not nice.
Yeah, we know.
The people that are resisting vaccination in the United States, which is primarily people in the red states, they're just about to get hit by a tsunami.
Yeah.
That they aren't expecting. And so.
And can we ask you, how come you know about this tsunami?
Well, because I'm working with people in India and Malaysia, and the Delta virus came from India, and I know what the consequences have been in India in spades. And my other life, my Logos life, this is my Eros life, but my Logos life is about creating the International Pandemic Preparedness Center.
Is the virus a lab-created virus?
I beg your pardon?
Is it a lab-created virus?
I don't care. It's a virus that is extant in the world, and it needs to be addressed. That's all I care about. I'm not interested in blame.
And where it comes from,
I'm not interested in where it comes from. I'm interested in having people prepared for it and being aware of what's happening in their community. So just, for example, I think I've shown this to you before, but let me I'll put a link here. Okay, so, and I'll put it on the YouTube channel too, why not? And then look at people, the people tab, and news. And you'll see my Logos Life. And
I'm interested, what does this virus have to do with the COVID virus? Are they cousins or what?
well, no, there's with the COVID virus,
Yeah,
it's a manifestation of COVID-19.
It's a variation of COVID.
Yeah.
It grows if you don't really take care of the virus when you can. It
Yeah,
grows
and,
and
it's worse than the original
Yeah.
COVID virus that came to the United States.
yeah,
It's almost twice as bad.
yeah,
it's got a life of its own.
it does actually. It does. a
It's
virus.
God and the devil put together.
Yeah. So those are the tabs that you need to look at on that YouTube connection.
It's called the Delta virus.
Yeah, it's the Delta variant of COVID-19. But there are something like 160
Variation?
variations,
Oh my
but
God.
Delta is the one that went through India really badly recently and resulted in people having to cremate their loved ones in the street. Literally cremate people in the street. There are videos of it. And it's just horrific. It still is horrific. And Malaysia's shut down again completely. I think Hong Kong is also. So, this is really serious. And the people that are blowing it off are the ones that are going to get whacked by it the next time. And so anyway.
So this vaccine covers those 160 strands?
Well, I wouldn't say it covers 160, but it covers a lot of them. And
Yeah.
we've been told that it'll protect you from
Well, at
Type
least
D.
you're gonna have antibodies to fight
it.
against the disease,
Yeah.
and it's the best that we can have. And it's better to have some type of defense than not
than
having anyone.
no defense.
Yeah.
Yeah, no defense.
Here in Brazil, we had the variation called P1, which is probably similar to the Delta
Mhm.
in India, and it was pretty bad. Oh, like we had a spike of like, I don't know, like 90,000 people dying within a span of a few days. It was pretty awful. So it's not-
Some friends of yours died?
family members, yeah. Actually, the only family member that I've lost due to COVID was one of the denials. That
How old was the member?
70, but he actually made the precocious treatment that we have here, which doesn't work. It's scientifically can prove that doesn't work. But he had the treatment, he was making it, and he died due to liver and kidney failure, not just COVID. So
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I have 5 people in my immediate friends and family circle who have died from COVID. Just so you know.
I think that here in Brazil, even though we have like a massive population, every family will have at least one family member lost to COVID. It's that bad.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
Are they all any of those members under 50?
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of them, kids.
Yep.
A lot of kids.
One of them was 31. In fact, 2 were 31. Plus, plus another friend, his girlfriend got COVID, ended up for a month on a ventilator in a ICU, survived, but she's having to have a oxygen tube for the foreseeable future in order to breathe, which is a long-term effect. So it's not to be taken lightly. She did survive, but by the skin of her teeth, we thought she was going to die. She almost did. So,
Well, do we
Night,
all
Nick.
feel good about wrapping up?
yep. Good night. We'll
Good
wrap
night,
up,
everyone.
and we'll see you
Night,
next
everyone.
week, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah,
Peace.
You.
all right, bye everybody.
Please. Thank you. See
So,
you next
so
week.
we're agreed. You're going to hold forth next week, even if you're alone, right? Nick?
Yeah,
We're
sure.
completely alone. He's not gonna be completely alone. We're gonna be here, but we're just not presenting.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to be physically here in order for it to work, but I can't guarantee. I've had
Oh, that's
10,
okay.
10 radiation treatments so far, but by then I'll have had 15. And they say that side effects start to add up after the first 2 weeks. So
Mhm.
there we go.
I bet. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to do any and all of the facilitating and presentation if need be. So
Okay.
please, everybody, tune in next week when I jump into another philosophical quagmire. So
Great.
And I will rescind my earlier decision, Nick. So there we have it.
all right, take
enjoyed
care,
it.
everybody. See you next
Thank
week.
you.
See
Peace, love.
everybody.